On March 12, 1938, the Anschluss took place. Anschluss, meaning connection or joining, was the term the Nazis used when they annexed Austria and brought it into the new Nazi regime. During this time, there was a well-known composer by the name of Erich Wolfgang Korngold, who happened to be Jewish and had to flee Austria after the Nazis confiscated his house and threatened his family. Having already received work in America for a few feature films, and with more work on the horizon, Korngold left for Hollywood and cemented his role in film scoring history. The first film that he worked on after fleeing Austria was perhaps the greatest work of his life, the 1938 masterpiece, The Adventures of Robin Hood. So it's worth mentioning that Erich Korngold is one of the grandfathers of film scoring. You know, like whenever you think of a film score and you have like a particular sound in mind, this was one of the guys who was responsible for that. For example, let's see if you can recognize what this piece of music inspired. Anyway, so when looking at these feature films, Korngold, along with the other grandfathers of film scoring, had to figure out how to put music into these films that would, well, to put it bluntly, that would just actually make sense. Yes, they could just go all out and write concert music that would blow all the academics away, but you gotta realize who your audience is. The people who go to movies aren't also going to operas and concert halls, and most don't have a super developed understanding of concert music. At the same time, this was all happening at the tail end of the Great Depression, so you'd be lucky if the people in the audience were even fed. So in this film, Korngold tried to figure out a way to have the music be sophisticated, but still make sense to a general audience, and ironically, he ended up using leitmotifs to help musically guide his audience. I say ironically because leitmotifs were like a Wagner thing, and Wagner was like a super racist and like would have been a Nazi if he was born like 50 years later. You can kind of think of Wagner as like the Qui-Gon Jinn of the Nazi party. Anyway, so Korngold figures that if there are recurring pieces of music throughout the film, then Korngold could help the audience better understand what's going on in the music, while at the same time using that music to help the audience understand what's going on in the film. So you have a perfect marriage between the narrative of the film and the soundtrack. Yay. So check out what happens at the very beginning of the film. You get a close-up of the title character, and you hear his leitmotif. Perfect. We have established our character's leitmotif, and we hear it repeated almost immediately afterwards when Robin Hood shoots the mace out of the bad guy's hand. But then check out what happens in this scene when Robin Hood shows up to Prince John's castle with the deer that his friend illegally killed. So aside from being a baller move, the Robin Hood leitmotif is menacing instead of heroic. Korngold slightly altered the leitmotif to the point where it's still familiar enough to recognize that it's Robin Hood, but it's different enough to show us that Robin Hood is in a dangerous situation. This technique of altering thematic material is called thematic transformation. It's also known as thematic development, thematic metamorphosis, motivic development, motivic transformation, and in a few specific cases, cyclic form. But we're going to stick with thematic transformation for this video just for convenience sake and because I think it's the most accurate for what we're describing. So in this film, whenever Korngold establishes a leitmotif, he'll thematically transform that leitmotif to fit whatever's going on screen. Now, this isn't exactly a new technique. Thematic transformation's been going on for centuries. Back in Mozart's day, they had an entire genre of music called theme and variations that revolved around this concept. Beethoven used it in his Ninth Symphony. And this idea of thematic transformation was what actually gave Wagner all that power with his leitmotifs. Yes, he used small pieces of thematic musical information to represent things that were going on in his operas, but the real artistry of a leitmotif comes from how it's used. So a great example is Siegfried's leitmotif. Siegfried's one of the heroes in Wagner's massive 4-part opera called Der Ring des Nibelungen, and when Siegfried dies, his leitmotif becomes a funeral march. In some cases, Wagner would transform one leitmotif into another leitmotif. One of the gods, called Erda, represents like nature and fate and the natural world and all that stuff. So when all the gods in Valhalla are killed off at the end of the opera, it's a complicated story, I'm not going to go there. Her leitmotif gets inverted or flipped upside down to musically show that. So back to Robin Hood. Korngold knew all of Wagner's techniques and figured that that would be the best way to musically tell the story. So whenever Robin Hood is doing something dangerous, you get that dangerous version of Robin Hood's leitmotif in all kinds of different permutations.
Continue!
You hear it so often, in fact, that by the end, all you really need is a single chord to know where an arrow comes from.
This outlaw by the heels when I get back.
In fact, take a look at this. So when Robin Hood's being a massive creeper and climbing into Maid Marian's room, you hear this. It took me a while to pick up on this, but if you pay really close attention, it's actually Robin Hood's leitmotif, but in strings. Why strings? That's because whenever you see Maid Marian on screen, she's accompanied by strings.
Is that the only reason for liking him?
Isn't that reason enough for a royal ward who must obey her guardian?
Nay, I'd not force you, my lady.
So the music that plays when these two are together and being all lovey-dovey is literally the two musical identities that represent these characters coming together. In fact, whenever you see these two characters before this big love scene, you can hear bits and pieces of what plays in the tower scene. It's almost as if Korngold was trying to musically communicate that there's a budding relationship between these two characters.
You will let me know if you regain your appetite, won't you?
Now, in most of my videos, I like to go through every single musical example and break down everything that a film or a video game or a TV show might have. Every leitmotif, every little musical reference, every Easter egg. But here I just have to throw in the towel. After seeing this film 3 times, I found over 54 independent instances of Korngold using or otherwise manipulating these leitmotifs in order to add to the narrative of Robin Hood. Like whenever Robin Hood fires a really important arrow on screen, there's a harp gliss. Like here toward the beginning of the film, you see this little text appeared that describes what's happening to King Richard. And then in the end, when King Richard actually appears on screen, you hear it again. Right here when we see Little John whistling, he's whistling Sumer is a Coomin' In, which is one of the oldest pieces of music that we have from medieval England that doesn't directly come from a church. And don't even get me started on the music that plays over the opening credits. Korngold uses that music to represent the merry men. You hear little pieces of it whenever they bring someone new into the fold.
My head hums like a swarm of bees.
If you'd have said that before, you'd have saved us both a wedding. Come along, then.
You'll join us?
Aye, if only to convert you.
And you hear it repeated in a more serious tone whenever the merry men are preparing for like an ambush or combat or something. Exactly how Robin Hood's leitmotif changes when he shows up at the castle. but like using that music over the opening credits almost brings the audience into the musical identity of the Merry Men, as if the audience is now a part of Robin Hood's gang. And beyond all that, some of the musical references are just so incredibly subtle. Like, check this part out.
Return of our king and sovereign, Richard the Lionheart. And swear to fight to the death against our oppressors.
Did you hear a very slight reference to that same opening idea that Korngold is using to represent the Merry Men? I did, or at least I think I did. Maybe I just felt like I did. This is just one of those moments where I would be willing to set my piano on fire if it meant that I can get my hands on the score to this film, so I could really figure out everything that went into this genius score. If there's ever a situation where I have to write a dissertation, I hope I get to write it about this film. But I bring up The Adventures of Robin Hood because I want to highlight a problem that I don't think that I've been communicating properly. So in Robin Hood, the music moves with the narrative. When Robin Hood is in danger, you hear the music that represents Robin Hood, but it might be minor, or the orchestration might be more intense, or it could be reharmonized. Something to communicate what has changed and how the narrative is moving forward. As I already mentioned, this technique is called Thematic Transformation, and it's critical to understanding how a leitmotif works. Having a piece of music represent something in a story is only half the battle. It's how you manipulate the music and move with the narrative that really demonstrates a leitmotif's power. And this is in stark contrast to what we see a lot of time in film, television, and video games nowadays. I don't know how it happened, but now we have a lot of people saying that an entire piece of music is a theme, and that themes all represent characters or places. So now a theme is like a genre of music that represents something in a narrative instead of just being a complete musical idea, like how we might use the term subject in a classical piece of music. But these pieces of theme music almost never change and just repeat whenever they're called upon. If you look at my video about music in Pixar films, you can see what I'm talking about. The music is, for the most part, just copied and pasted. The music isn't really adding to the narrative of the film. In these cases, the music functions more like an object that can be set up and paid off. If any of you know about Chekhov's gun, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's like, you know the scene in The Incredibles when Mr. Incredible wants a cape and Edna says, "No capes"? And then we see and are told about a bunch of heroes that go down because they don't have capes. And then at the end of the film, Syndrome dies too, you guessed it, his cape. Set up, payoff. So you play a piece of music to set up a sense of familial togetherness, and then you play that off later in the film when the characters are reunited. And this is kind of becoming a real problem. When the music genuinely becomes a part of the background to a story and is almost interchangeable with whatever the director might think sounds okay in that moment, without actually having any ties to the narrative, the music isn't necessarily adding to the narrative of your film, which in turn is a big reason why so many people are having such apathetic views towards the music that they listen to in video games, television, and film. Like, take this scene from Naruto.
ずっとバカやってたんだ。苦しかった。そうだよな、ナルト。寂しかったんだよな。
This track is called Sadness and Sorrow. I wonder what it means. I don't remember it ever changing, but then again, I only made it about 40 episodes in, and it just repeats whenever the director's trying to get his audience to cry. But that isn't always a bad thing. Like, first off, it is infinitely cheaper to just have one piece of music that you can throw around. Like, if you have 4,000 episodes in your series, maybe hiring a full-time composer and having that person write custom music for every episode can get a little pricey. Another reason you might want your music to just be an object in the background is when you're dealing with a population that isn't super musically literate and can't really process too much information at once, like children. If you're going to make a family movie, it's important that the kids get what's going on, which is why Pixar's keeping it simple. Being able to save money and help your target demographic understand what's going on all at the same time is a literal win-win. Like, close your eyes. I'm going to leave the screen blank, but sincerely close your eyes and tell me what you think when you hear this music. It's SpongeBob and Patrick just messing around, right? You don't have to be paying close attention to the story or anything. SpongeBob and Patrick are about to do something stupid and make you laugh. Just sit back and enjoy. But none of this should come at the expense of utilizing music as a narrative device in other media. And in recent years, the idea that music can be an element of your narrative has become increasingly, if not frighteningly, rare. But you didn't come to my channel for depressing Great Barrier Reef rhetoric. You came to hear about some kick-ass musical ideas. And for that, we're going to have to consult with Nintendo's own Jedi Master. You know he's a Jedi Master because he did an amazing job and you don't even know about it. Believe it or not, there is only one musical idea for every single level of Super Mario World. There are 6 different variations, but they're all based on the same theme. every level be a different variation on that same theme, you get the idea that although all of these areas might have their own style, they're all contained in the same world. But in recent years, I don't think I've seen a better example of what I've been talking about than in Shovel Knight. Okay, that was important. I'm going to play it again. Those 3 notes are Shovel Knight's leitmotif. It also shows up in Steal Thy Shovel, which plays whenever you're inputting your name. You can also hear it referenced in the opening cinematic. In that same cinematic, you hear this when you start seeing what happened to Shield Knight. This is Shield Knight's leitmotif, and you hear it reoccur in Starlit Wilds, which is the track you hear whenever Shovel Knight's sitting at his campfire thinking about why he's going off on his adventure. So, oh gee, I wonder if you'd hear both these leitmotifs at the same time if ever there was a moment in the game where you saw both of these characters on screen working together. And then in Plague of Shadows, when you play as Plague Knight and then you go back to the Explodatorium and you fight against Shovel Knight, you hear this. Because that's Shovel Knight's leitmotif. But what really blew me away was when I played the Spectre of Torment story. In this story, you play as Spectre Knight and visit all the same areas as both Shovel Knight and Plague Knight, except that the level design has been altered to fit Spectre Knight's unique playstyle. So Jake Kaufman, the composer to the Shovel Knight series, decided to alter each level's music in order to reflect the change in level design. You could just say it's a remix, but the important part to remember here is that it's a remix for a reason. He didn't do it just because he felt like it, he did it to musically communicate the different perspective of the same world as expressed in the altered level design. So, is this a case of thematic transformation or theme and variations? Is this technically cyclic form? Are these leitmotifs or themes? Or is this all just thematic material? And when we use the term theme, do we mean the main idea of a piece of music, like how in the art music world we might use the term subject? Or do we mean theme in the more contemporary sense where it's an entire piece of music that might represent one character or place? Honestly, I don't know. And I don't care, because that doesn't matter. What matters is that the music isn't an object to be thrown around. It's organic. It lives and breathes within the world of the narrative. So the next time you're playing a game, or watching a television show or a movie, and you hear a piece of music get repeated without changing, ask yourself, how is this music telling me a story? That's it for me for now, guys. If you have any musical questions, be sure to follow me on Twitch and Twitter so I can answer all your questions live. And if you really liked what I did, consider contributing to my Patreon page. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching.